Hello jewelers, this is Mr. Gremlin coming to you live from Mr. Gremlin Studios. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some wire ideas. So you obviously have your worksheet and you're going through the different activities that you might see there. For instance, you'll have something that says show 4 squares being playful, and maybe you'll kind of stack them up like this. So maybe kind of like balancing on each other. And maybe there's one kind of doing a flip. These actually come from graphic design activities that I've done in college and things like that. Now these activities might give you some ideas of things that you like to do. So maybe you could make a necklace that looks like these squares being playful, or maybe a way of making little triangles out of wire and creating some order, some interesting patterns out of that. So those are obviously ideas that you can take from the front side of the sheet. Oftentimes when people get to the back side of the sheet and they start getting their 9 ideas, I wanted to show some ways that you can create some pretty cool ideas. So these first 2 ideas here are rings. So I actually have had a ring like this on my desk, and I've gotten a lot of questions about it. It's actually pretty easy to do. If you think about like how long, like if you measure the circumference of your finger with a little strip of paper, you think about you need the ring to be that long. And then you take a piece of wire and you make kind of a large ring, a large shape, and then you solder the ends together like that. Now, yesterday you should have seen a video about how to make jump rings. It's great. You just take a piece of wire, you wrap it around something like a pencil, and then you cut them off with your pliers, and you have all of these circles. Well, if you take these circles and you fill up this area to make it flat, you can make a really interesting design really quickly. And then the way that you get this to stick together is you butt solder wherever they're connected. So, you know, in here you butt solder there to the edge. And once you butt solder all these joints, it might take a little bit to get it set up and prepped and things like that. But once you have everything soldered together, then all you need to do is take this piece, wrap it into a circle, and solder the ends together, throw it in the tumbler, and you got something kind of amazing. Another thing that people like to do are the twisted wire rings. So they take that wire, they twist it together, and that's awesome. I love that technique. However, I want you to do something more to it. So instead of just making one ring with it, if you make 2 rings with it. And so here we have 2 twisted wires, and they're kind of like soldered together here, and then they get wide in the middle. And I took one of those jump rings and I put it in there and bent up a little shape here, like a little lightning bolt. So it's almost kind of like a ring that maybe the Flash would wear. A flashy ring for Flash. A flashy Flash ring. Alright. By doing this, by making 2 rings and then kind of a little focal piece here in the center, I think you have a really strong composition. Sometimes people get a little too simplistic with their wire projects, and so you want to add some details. Now here I have a pendant, and here I have a bracelet. Now this bracelet is basically just the same idea as this ring. You take a big piece of wire and you bend it around and you solder the end together, and you make a nice big rectangle. And then you make all kinds of shapes and solder them, butt solder them in there to fill up this whole area. Make big swirls, little swirls. We're just going to butt solder all these things together all the way across, and then you have a really interesting bracelet. And then once you have all these soldered together, all you got to do is kind of bend it around so it fit around your wrist. Now we do have mandrels for bracelets in the red toolbox up at the front, so you can be looking for those too. Now let's say you don't want to fill in all of this area, you can maybe just like kind of create a center focal piece here and fill them in with designs. And then butt solder all these together. And so it could be that this whole outside area here is open, and that's just fine. And you kind of just have this center focal piece where the bracelet might sit on top. Now a bracelet, typically you'll make something that's about 6 inches long for a bracelet. Generally speaking, that's how it goes. Another way that you can do this, now this is a pendant, so like you can put this on the end of a necklace here, but you can actually, you know, take characters like this and just break it up into different lines. So maybe this line here, I'll kind of bend this up. And each of these might be a separate piece of wire. And again, just like kind of all of these other ideas, you kind of lay them flat, butt solder all the different wires together so that they hold together. And you can have a really interesting design here. And it's pretty easy to put together. Now, it will probably take you a little bit at the soldering station to kind of lay all of these pieces out. When you're doing wire work like this, you don't need to have the wire mesh, and that's really helpful because the brick is actually a lot flatter. So if you want to do something like this, you'll lay all your pieces out directly on the brick, and because the wire is so thin, it won't, you'll be able to solder directly on top of the brick, and the brick won't absorb the heat too fast as you're soldering. But be careful, because if you get that heat a little bit too close, you can melt your wire. If you use the copper wire that we use for most of the work that we do in class, that should be thick enough to withstand the heat and won't melt too bad. Sometimes the brass wire, it has a little bit of a lower melting point, so sometimes you'll run into some situations where that will actually melt before it actually solders. So just be a little bit careful, but with your skills at this point, I bet you can definitely pull this off. So here's some cool ideas for you. I hope they are helpful, and I hope you continue to make great pieces of jewelry. Have a great Titan day, jewelers.